Hi, this is Shruti. Today we are going to present the financial analysis of Microsoft versus Apple. Let me give a brief introduction about these companies. Apple company designs, manufactures, and markets mobile communication and media devices, personal computers, and portable digital music players. And it also sells a variety of related software, services, peripherals, networking solutions, and third-party digital content and applications. Coming to Microsoft company, it's a leading developer of personal computer software systems and applications. Let's see the key competitors of Apple company. Since Apple manufactures a different line of products, I have categorized them as per the products. Coming to the desktop OS, they have Microsoft Windows and Linux as a competitors. On desktop hardware, they have AMD and Intel. MP3 player, Philips and Zoom companies. Smartphone operating systems, they have Android as competitor. And in phone hardware, they have Samsung, Motorola, and Google. Coming to the tablets, they have Samsung, Asus, and Amazon companies. Cloud storage, they have Google Drive and OneDrive as their key competitors. Let's look at the timeline of the Apple. Apple was founded in 1976 and they released the product called Apple One in the same year. In 1987, they first corporate stock was issued, and in 1991 they have partnered up with IBM and Motorola. In 1997 they have entered into a partnership with Microsoft. In 2001 they have launched their first official retail store, and then in 2001 iPod was released, and after that a few products were released like MacBook Pro, Mac Mini, iTunes, and iPhones. And then in 2010 iPad first version was released, and the recent launch for them was Apple Watch. Let's see the key challenges faced by them. The first challenge is scaling up. One of the most important challenges faced by Apple is to meet the ever-increasing demands of the products. Apple devices are in huge demand worldwide, and the demand is scaling up every year. The years 2012 and 2013 saw Apple falling short by about 3 million products, but by 2014 they had found a way to exponentially increase the production. It remains to be seen whether they can keep up with the demand. The second key challenge faced by them is like difficulty with acquisitions. Although Apple has a highly successful policy of absorbing other companies, the trend has been buckled up by a few of the latest additions. The Quattro Wireless deal in 2015 is a prime example for the latest of their latest problems with acquisitions. Maintaining relevance and integrity of the products. Apple products are renowned for the cutting-edge technology, reliability, and ease of use. The new devices are already packed with all the latest technologies, and it remains to be seen how Apple is going to improve the products they're planning to release. Let's see the key competitors of Microsoft. Desktop OS, they have iOS and Linux. In MP3 player, they have iPod and Philips. Smartphone operating systems, they had Symbian and BlackBerry OS. Operating systems, they had Symbian and BlackBerry OS. Currently, they have Android and iOS. When it comes to tablets, they have iPad, Samsung, Asus, Amazon. Cloud storage, they have Google Drive and iCloud. Gaming arena, Sony PlayStation, and Nintendo. Coming to the timeline, in 1975, Microsoft was found, and in 1981, they have released the first version of operating system known as MS-DOS. And later in 1985, Windows software was released. In 1986, Microsoft stock goes public. In 1995, they have released Windows 95 and then Internet Explorer. In the subsequent years, they have released few products, and in 2010, they have launched Windows Phone 7 and then Surface release. And in 2014, they have released Microsoft Band. And in 2015, they have released Microsoft Edge browser, replacing Internet Explorer for operating systems 10, Windows operating system 10. Popularizing the latest version of Windows. The greatest asset of Windows, the Windows XP and 7, is also proving to be a barrier for popularizing the latest version of Windows. The number of users who are content with continuing XP and 7 are proving to be quite a problem in the ability to meet the latest version of Windows prevalent in the market. As of January 2016, 80% of the users worldwide still use either Windows 7 or XP. The next challenge is overseeing a managerial makeover. It takes a while for any company, irrespective of the size and number of the employees, to adjust to a new management and the differences in the way it is run. For a company like Microsoft, it remains to be seen how smoothly the ship sails with a new CEO, board chairman, and activist investor among others.
Now let's look at the business strategies of Apple and Microsoft. Apple runs on a broad differentiation generic strategy. It emphasizes on elegant design combined with user friendliness and high-end branding. It definitely sets itself apart with its seamless connectivity amongst its devices and a cutting-edge aesthetics in design. It also focuses on using this strategy in maintaining its leadership and position as a high-end and high-value business. Now, looking at Microsoft, diversity and inclusion are an integral part of Microsoft's vision and success. They do make sure that they have the brightest diverse minds by employing personnel with varied perspectives, skills, and experiences. By collaborating cultures and ideas as an organizational asset, and it brings forth the greater creativity and innovation. Before getting into the hard financial facts, here is the basic financial information of both these corporate giants. Both these companies cater to the same sector, that is technology. It is easy to compare the numbers because both these companies are listed on the same stock exchange. Apple's NASDAQ code is APPL and Microsoft's is MSFT. Apple caters to the consumer electronics industry, and Microsoft's industry is business software and services. The yearly numbers are different as these companies have different financial year ends. Apple ends in September and Microsoft in June. Now, looking at what Street says about Apple, here is the number of investment recommendations from the major analysts and stock viewers. The buy and the strong buy are well in number for Apple. Let's see what the growth estimates and how they support the reason for these recommendations. While Apple is busy sketching its game plan to beat the FBI and find the iPhone that would change their fortune once again, Apple and its industry currently show dipping numbers. Nevertheless, the Street's analysts predict a positive growth for Apple, but the numbers are just close to the industry's average. The drop in the current prices is a compelling reason for the strong recommendation of buying Apple shares right now. Seeing what they have to talk about Microsoft, it is also a good number of recommendations for strong buy and buy. Looking at the current scores and estimates, Microsoft is doing pretty well in the market, and the estimates also look very promising.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the business drivers for Apple. Now, Apple is highly dependent on one or two particular segments like iPad and iPhone. So that's these two are definitely business drivers for Apple. Now, innovation. Now, Apple's name has been synonymous with innovation and innovative products. So that's definitely a big business driver for them. Horizontal and vertical integration. So by that we mean that now Apple has been into many products like iPhone, iPad, laptops, but they also come up with their own OS, software, hardware. So when a person uses multiple Apple products together, you definitely have a better experience. So it makes it difficult for a person to change over to any competitive product after that. So that's definitely been Apple's key business driver for a long time now. Again, next is high install base. Because of huge user base for Apple products, a lot of application softwares are specifically made for Apple, which further drives its business growth. Then we have marketing and branding, which has been important for Apple and brings in a lot of users every time because of its brand value. And carrier plans, so like AT&T carrier plans have a huge impact on iPhone sales. So that's definitely a key business driver for them. Next, we have Microsoft business drivers. Now, Microsoft's business has been highly dependent on the PC market or the licensing market through Windows and Microsoft Office products. Now secondly, they're increasing their focus on cloud computing with products like Azure and on the application server market. Next, again, they have a huge install base, huge user base, and a lot of products being specifically made especially made for Microsoft and Windows, which further drives the business. Fourth, their channel partners are really important for them, as 95% of revenue comes from their channel partners. And lastly, strong R&D and innovation has been important for Microsoft, as innovation finally drives a tech giant. Next, we have Apple risks. Now, for Apple, they are highly dependent on like one or two products, like we mentioned before. So that's definitely a risk for them. So secondly, they've been trying to enter emerging markets. So the local laws and regulations have been, kind of risky for them, and even the premium pricing has been made it difficult to enter into the emerging markets like India. Thirdly, they are highly dependent on their carriers, on distributors. So any change in AT&T pricing plans for iPhones will have huge impact on iPhone sales. Fourth, their lack of innovation. If they do not come up with a breakthrough innovation product soon, that may affect their brand value and stock price in future. Lastly, their legal battles. So any legal battle that drives Apple into limelight will have huge impact either financially on for them, or it may impact the brand or stock price in turn. Finally, next we have Microsoft risks. Now, Microsoft has been overexposed to PC market, which has been dwindling down, recently. So that's a big risk for them. Secondly, their hardware initiatives like the Nokia acquisition has not been too profitable recently. So that was a risky venture for them. Piracy again for Microsoft has been a problem in the emerging markets as it eats into their revenue. And lastly, again, government litigation and regulatory activity for Microsoft will just bring, may affect their stock price or their brand value. So that's about Microsoft risks.
Apple's business segmentation geographically can be seen in the graph, which consists of segments like America, Europe, China, Japan, and Asia Pacific. The net income for Apple's revenue has greatly been through US and China. Asia Pacific is the fastest growing segment for Apple. Continuing on to business segmentation for products and services, Apple's trend can be seen over the past years as shown in the graph, and iPhone has always been its leading revenue generator. For Microsoft, licensing has been the main revenue generator, but the trend for 2015 as seen in the graph shows that total devices and consumer hardware made a great impact because of the release of Surface tablets. Also, licensing was the next big earner for Microsoft. Computing and gaming hardware are in a boom because of sales of Xbox. Microsoft might have a new star revenue generator if Azure App Services grow. Continuing with the executive compensation comparison, we can see the graphs for 2014 and 2015 for both the companies. Let's compare the individual compensation for both the companies now. Starting for Apple, Tim Cook started as Apple CEO in 2011. Last year, Apple gave Cook $9.2 million, including a salary of $1.8 million, with $6.7 million in bonus and $699,000 for security. This didn't include 80,000 restricted stock units that Apple presented Cook. In 2014, Cook made about $92,885,625 from stock alone. Adding this to his normal compensation, in 2014, Cook earned about $102,180,263. Coming to Microsoft, we can see the executive compensation listed as shown below. But Satya Nadella became the CEO for Microsoft in 2014. In that year, he was considered the industry's biggest earner with a total compensation of $84.3 million and stock awards valued at $79.3 million. Considering his cut, we can see the base salary at $918,000 with a cash bonus of $3.6 million and a one-time grant of stock value at $59.2 million. Also last year, Microsoft awarded him 0.4% of its $12.1 billion economic profit. Next, continuing on with earnings call. We are considering the most recent earnings call for both the companies. Apple represented its strongest financial results ever. All-time record quarterly revenue of $75.9 billion, which led to $18.4 billion net income was reported. Operating income of $24.21 billion resulted in an operating margin of 31.9% of revenue. Sales were about $45.46 billion, which resulted in a gross margin of 40.1%. For Microsoft, the revenue reported was 25.7 billion, which led to 6.3 billion in net income. Operating income of 7.9 billion, resulting in operating margin of 30.7% was reported.
Hi, I'm Pranita, and I'm going to take you through the horizontal analysis and vertical analysis for Apple and Microsoft. We have analyzed balance sheet and income statement for the years 2014 and 2015. Starting with the asset comparison, we can notice that in spite of Apple's huge cash reserves, the total current asset of Microsoft is higher. Whereas in the case of fixed assets, we can notice that the increase in Apple is much higher compared to Microsoft. However, finally, the total assets increased greater for Apple when compared to Microsoft. Moving on to the liability comparison, we can notice that there's an increase in account payable for Apple, whereas there's an increase in short and current term debt for Microsoft. However, the total long-term debt, we can notice that there's a huge change in Apple when compared to Microsoft. And beginning with the stockholders' equity, we can notice that there's a huge capital stock increase in case of Apple, whereas there's a decrease in retained earnings in case of Microsoft. And so finally, the stockholders' equity increased for Apple when compared to Microsoft. Doing a horizontal analysis of the income statement, we can like operating income and income from operating expenses is significant for any company to analyze its financial position. And we can see there's an increase for Apple and decrease for Microsoft. Hence, it affected the net income, and we can see the huge increase for Apple, whereas a very large decrease for Microsoft. And doing the vertical analysis for the income statement, we can notice like major changes for Apple in case of cost of revenue, gross profit, operating income, and so on. Whereas in Microsoft, the noticeable change was in case of gross profit alone, and also the cost of revenue increased. Moving to the vertical analysis of the balance sheet, we can notice that there's a greater change for short-term investments for Microsoft, and there's a greater change for long-term investments for Apple. And also the shareholders' equity, we can notice the contrast where the capital stock increased for Microsoft and the retained earnings increased for Apple. We have listed a few observations based on the horizontal and vertical analysis of the financial statements done. Starting with Apple, we can notice that it holds large amount of cash when compared to any other corporate company in US. It has about 21 billion cash and 20 billion in marketable securities, which can be converted into cash. And also, it has a huge net receivable of 35 billion. Though it is a risk, Apple has credit limit and risk insurance to protect itself. When coming to Microsoft, we can see a decrease in cash about 30%, which is a huge contrast between both the companies. And also another major asset for Apple is long-term marketable securities, probably investments in US treasuries and other corporate firms. And for Microsoft, we can notice there's a decrease in long-term investments. Some significant investments in new product development and other aspects might not turn out that profitable. And Apple reports 5 billion of goodwill, out of which 2.5 billion can be attributed to its acquisition of Beats in 2014. And we can see a decreasing trend in case of goodwill and intangibles for Microsoft. Sometimes impairment of intangibles might affect the revenue of any company. And if we notice the debts, we can notice a huge increase in short and as well as long-term debt of Apple. And in the case of Microsoft, there's an increase in short-term debt only. And there's no major change in stockholders' equity for Apple. Whereas for Microsoft, there's a decrease in retained earnings. This might be because it gave away around 6.5 billion in dividends last year. And also, if we notice the analysis of the income statements, we can notice that for Apple, both net sales and cost of sales increased. As net sales, the increase is large. It has a profit by about 30%. Whereas in the case of Microsoft, we see a decline of income by 44%. The net income decreased by 44%. Though there is an increase in revenue, we can see there's a decrease in operating income, and this might be the reason for the huge decrease in the total net income. In Microsoft, the R&D division increased by 30%, and it makes and the total net income makes 20% of the sales. Whereas in Microsoft, the short-term investments make most of the assets, and net income makes only 13% of the sales.
Thank you. And Sutikshan is going to present an in-depth analysis of the ratios, and he'll go deeper into the figures.
So let's take a look at some ratios. So first from the profitability ratio, in which we are analyzing ROA, ROE, EPS, and net profit margin. So as you can see from the charts, that ROA for both the companies, for that matter, for Apple is increasing from 14 to 15, and for Microsoft it's decreasing from 14 to 15. So ROA basically shows that Apple is using its assets to generate more earnings as compared to Microsoft, which is not using its assets efficiently. And our second profitability ratio is ROE, return on equity, in which again, if we see the trend from 14 to 15, there's an increase for Apple, and for Microsoft, there's a decrease from 14 to 15, which shows that Apple is generating more profit with the shareholders' money, and on the other hand, Microsoft is not deploying the shareholders' capital effectively. So let's go on to our next ratio, that is EPS. If you see the EPS for both the companies from 14 to 15, it is increasing for Apple and decreasing for Microsoft, which basically shows that Apple is generating a significant dividend for investors, and on the other hand, the Microsoft is not doing pretty well in this area. Let's take a look at net profit margin. So in net profit margin, we can see that again, Apple is doing well from 14 to 15, but Microsoft not doing that well from 14 to 15. And so basically that means that Apple is pricing its products correctly, hence higher net profit margin. But Microsoft, on the other hand, is not generating enough sales, or maybe their pricing, there's something wrong with their pricing. So let's go on to the liquidity ratios, which are the ratios which determine a company's ability to pay off its short-term debts. And the first one is current ratio. For the current ratio, we can see it's consistent for both the companies, being 1.1 for Apple for both the years and 2.5 for Microsoft for both the years. So we can infer that as long as it's more than one, it's pretty good for the companies. But in a way, it is not good for Microsoft, because maybe they are not using their current assets efficiently, and maybe it's maybe too high for this industry. For the other, on the other side, if you see debt to equity, so in debt to equity, there's an increase for both the companies from 14 to 15, and if you see that in Apple it was around 0.26 in 14 and 0.45 in 15. So which basically shows that financial leverage of Apple is more than Microsoft at this point of time. If we go to inventory turnover and days of inventory, which basically means the same, they're interrelated. That means that like if you see Apple's inventory turnover is very high as compared to Microsoft for both the years. That means that it means that how many times a company's inventory is sold in a year. So it is pretty good in case of Apple, but not that good in Microsoft. And the same goes with the days over inventory, since it's inversely proportional. So it is very low in case of Apple and very high in case of Microsoft, which is not good. So it basically tells you the number of days it takes for the company to sell the inventory on hand. So if you go to the market test ratios, which it basically helps the investors to estimate the attractiveness of potential or existing investment and basically get an idea of its evaluation. So if you see price to earnings ratio, so it basically so if you go back, yeah, so in this we can see that there's a decrease for Apple and there's a significant increase in case of Microsoft. And it basically says that maybe the market has high hopes from Microsoft for its stock's future and has bid up the price, maybe because of the investment they're making right now. And on the other hand, Apple is maybe reaching saturation. And if we take a look at dividends yield, you can see that it is pretty much same for Apple for both the years, but it's going up for Microsoft. That means like Microsoft is paying more in dividends each year relative to its share price. So that was about the ratios. So let's take a look at investors' opinion. So from investors' point of view, Apple is showing good numbers in profitability, but Microsoft has a growth potential and has a greater scope in future. So there are few cases, there are few factors which says that like currently Apple is reaching the saturation point. There are FPI cases and things like that. And in case of Microsoft, their investments in cloud like Microsoft Azure is a big hit. There are more, but on the other hand, there are more expectations from customers to keep up the trend. So from investors' point of view, uh, Microsoft is better for an investor to invest at this point of time, since their future looks more bright as compared. And now let's talk about creditors' opinion. For those, so these two ratios are more important from creditors' point of view: debt to equity and accounts payable turnover. From both the ratios from both the years for both the companies, we can infer that we can take a positive stand on Apple as a creditor. So Apple has a like a higher hand at this point of time as a creditor. So our like we narrowed down and we discussed and we thought that Apple will be the winner of the past and current based on all the numbers. But in the view of the future, we feel that Microsoft is a winner.